Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to talk about the four most important questions in PTE which carry 70% of the score in the test. Now many of you already know about these questions, that's why rather than just mentioning these questions I will actually talk about some of the tips and tricks you can apply, but I will also tell you some of the tips and tricks which no longer work in PTE and should not be tried. If you are interested, keep watching. If you're new to this channel, my name is Roman. I'm founder of Roman PT, which offers face-to-face classes to people in Melbourne, as well as online classes to people all over the world. If you're interested in our courses, please visit the website given in the description. So let's get started about today's topic, that is important questions in PT, the tips and tricks to apply there, and the tips and tricks you should avoid that you may have heard from elsewhere. In PT, you perhaps already know that there are three sections: Section 1, Section 2, and Section 3. In Section 1, we have speaking and writing. And in Section 2, we have reading. And then after that, in Section 3, we have listening. Now, in each of these sections, there are questions which are important for the entire test. Section 1 has speaking and writing, and it has two important questions for your test. And these questions are read aloud and repeat sentence. In Section 2, you have reading, and in reading, there is one important question, that is reading and writing, fill in the blanks. And in Section 3, we have listening, which has only one important question, that is write from dictation. Now, if you are wondering, what about the rest of the 16 questions? I'm not saying they're not important. What I'm saying is if you have to prioritize your practice, then you should focus on these four questions, especially if you're targeting more than 65 in each section, because these questions carry 70% of the total point, which is around 63 out of 90. And of course, if anyone is looking for 65, it's always a good idea to get 63 first. And I hope you agree to that. All right, now let's talk about these questions one by one and discuss what are the important tips and tricks for these questions. In speaking, if you speak faster, you get more points because while speaking faster, perhaps you maintain the continuity, and Pearson's algorithm looks at the continuity to give you a score for fluency. And if you get good score in fluency, you get good score in speaking, but you are not preparing just for speaking, so you need to be really careful, because when you are speaking fast or if you're speaking too loud, that compromises the clarity of your sound and you might lose a score in pronunciation. That is one of the reasons why many people who speak really fast without proper pauses and without proper intonation and rhythm end up getting higher score in speaking, but at the same time lose a score in reading, because read aloud contributes a significant portion of a score to reading as well. So what you should do when you are doing read aloud, try to speak as naturally as you can and don't be inconsistent in your speed or in your tone. What you should not do: don't speak too fast and too loud, as it compromises the clarity. And if you want to know why, please watch my previous upload where I have discussed what are the factors which affect clarity. The next question type is repeat sentence. Now, there are two strategies people use in this question, and that is first, memorize some sentences, and second, write the first letter of each word. Both of these tricks are not going to work in your exam, and if you have tried it yourself, you perhaps have already seen it. First thing, trying to write the first letter of each word does not work in the exam simply because in long sentences, these first letters actually can be more confusing. In short sentences, you do not need any tricks anyway. And that's why using the tricks, which only work maybe less than half of the times, is not a good idea. So what should you do rather? Rather than memorizing the sentences or writing the first letter, what you should do is get a list of all the questions asked in the past exam, and you will get around 300 questions for repeat sentence for that. You might get 600 and 1000 as well, but there is no point doing more than what you need to. 300 is more than enough. From these 300 sentences, try to find out the phrases which repeat in your test. That means from each sentence, extract the phrase which they use in the exam, so that even if you don't get the same question, or even if the characters in the sentences change, you can still answer the question because you know the phrases. And second important thing is, don't worry if you can't remember the full sentence, because the scoring actually looks at the proportion of the sentence you could repeat rather than how many words you could repeat. which means a person who is able to repeat more than 50% of the sentence will get the same score as a person who repeated 99% of the sentence. That means the more important idea here is to speak clearly and to speak fluently, which means focus more on smoothness of your answer and also focus more on clarity. And again, if you do not know about fluency in pronunciation, watch my video about fluency in pronunciation where I have explained how you get points for that. So one thing that you must do in speaking is be consistent and be clear. And one thing that you should never do in the exam is don't speak too fast, because that will compromise the clarity. So I hope this will help you in speaking. Let's move to reading now. In reading, the most important question is reading and writing fill in the blanks. Again, there are two strategies here. The first strategy for some people is to get a list of around 500 questions, memorize all of them, and then wait for the exam in which they will get questions from that list. And many of you may have already realized that questions do not repeat as frequently as they used to in the past, which means relying on this strategy is just relying on the luck, which I don't recommend. However, if you are planning to do these 500 questions, make sure that you can answer all the questions and you know the concepts behind them. This is a slightly longer process compared to just memorizing the answer. And those of you who feel like you cannot memorize the answers or you do not want to rely on the luck, this is the better strategy. So how do you use this strategy? While answering these questions, try to see which questions are based on collocations, which questions are based on vocabulary, and which questions are based on context. If you can identify the questions and try to learn the relevant strategies based in them, no matter what they ask you in the exam, you'll be able to answer such questions. For example, in the class, I always discourage students from memorizing the answers because that doesn't work for me. I can't memorize the answer and I can't ask people to do things that I'm not doing myself. I answer the questions based on the 3 things I just mentioned and using the 5 strategies that I have discussed in my reading and writing fill in the blanks video. And that's what I think everyone should do if they're really serious about the exam and don't want to rely on the luck. So learn academic vocabularies, learn collocations, learn the 3 concepts I just mentioned, and then try to answer the question. Using the past exam question is not a bad idea. It's just that you have to do it in the right way. Otherwise, you just have to be lucky. And many people have already complained that it usually doesn't happen in that way these days. Now, the next thing is write from dictation, which is the 4th most important question in your exam. Now, if we compare these 4 questions, out of them, write from dictation carries more points than any other questions. Write from dictation, how should we practice them? Again, there are around 300 sentences of write from dictation. You have to extract the key phrases from these sentences, make a list of these key phrases, and then make sure that you understand the order of words in these phrases as well as their meaning. In the exam, there can be a little variation in these phrases, but they will always ask you sentences based on these phrases. So if you simply memorize the sentence, then the problem in the exam will be the characters, the order, as well as the way they use the words might change. But if you learn the concept as well, then no matter how they do it, you'll be able to write it. In addition to this, also make sure that your sentences are grammatically correct as well as logically correct. That means be careful about missing punctuations and grammatical forms of the words and spelling. Now, one thing that you should not do in dictation these days is do not write more than required number of words. You need to listen to this really carefully because otherwise you might misunderstand this. In the past, there was a trick we used to use to answer write from dictation, especially in confusing situation. For example, if I would be confused whether the speaker said the book or a book, I would write a, the, and book, and computer would only pick the right word. If you do this these days, you will actually be severely penalized. I think Pearson has fixed that loophole in the algorithm. Because of that, it can clearly see this kind of tricks that people are using and penalizes people for doing this. So I highly recommend that you stay away from doing this because otherwise you'll lose your points. So let's wrap up now. What are the important things you should or should not do in these 4 important questions of your test? Read aloud. Don't just read from the screen. And what that means is be consistent in your pace, your delivery, and be clear in your pronunciation. By speaking faster, you might increase your score in fluency, thereby increasing your score in speaking, but you may compromise your score in reading. Repeat sentence. Almost no one can repeat all the sentences without problem, so it's okay if you can't do that. Remember, a score is given based on proportion. Try to repeat as much of the sentence as possible, but focus more on clarity as well as fluency. Reading and writing fill in the blanks. Memorizing the questions and their answers is not a good idea unless you want to rely on your luck. Rather, you should learn vocabularies, collocations from the questions, from the past exam questions, and then learn some concepts to answer these questions. So regardless of what they ask you in the exam, you can answer them. And the last one, write from dictation. For this question, learn the common phrases, their spelling, and the order of the words in these phrases. Be careful about the grammar and logical organization of the ideas. That's how you'll get the score. So this was just a brief rundown on different important things about 4 different questions which are important in your test. I hope this was useful, and if you also think the same, then please hit the like